great anticipation to hear this incredible testimony. We have Kleenex throughout the building, so get ready. And God's going to touch your heart. But how many have enjoyed Sister Martha Tennison? Have you enjoyed this time? Amen. And now she comes up here. Before I give you the microphone.
Yes, sir.
We confirmed, didn't we do it? We did it at lunchtime.
We did it.
January 31st of next year.
Yes.
How many are okay with that? Would love to see her come back. January 31st of next year.
Thank you, Pastor.
You know, there's one thing that all pastors love that they put in the Constitution and bylaws. You know what that is? That he has sole discretion of who gets to be in the pulpit. That's the one thing I get to really decide.
Amen.
You know. And how many are excited for her to come back of next year? Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. Hallelujah. And I'm excited to come back. Amen. I've enjoyed it so very much. Thank you again, church, for the lovely accommodations, for the meals, for the fellowship, for the love, for the offerings, and once again for being receptive to the Word of God. Thank you so much. You're a wonderful, wonderful people. God bless you. You're a friendly group of people. You've made us feel right at home, and we appreciate it. Thank you, Pastor and Sister April, for being such wonderful host and hostess. We appreciate it so much. You've treated us royally, and for the fellowship with these two good-looking young men. Amen? Let me once again thank the Wilsons for bringing us. Brother and Sister Wilson, would you stand, please? If you're glad that I am here this week, would you thank them after service for bringing me? How many know? Go ahead. That's great. How many knows there's more ministry than pulpit ministry? How many knows they're in the ministry? So, Brother and Sister Wilson, we appreciate it so very much. Thank you from the bottom of our heart. Amen? Because he lives. Sister Anita, where did she go? Oh, thank you so much. That was beautiful. I appreciate that. Thank you, worship team, musicians, once again for bringing us into the presence of God. We appreciate it so very much. Thank you for being so great to attend these services. You have done an excellent job being here. Thank you so much. Visitors, Pastor Delmer, Pastor Gail, thank you all, wives, for being here. We love you, appreciate you. Thank you so very much. Done a wonderful job. Folks, as she was playing that, I was thinking, there's a verse in that song that goes like this, and I'm not singing, I'll quote it to you. How sweet to hold a newborn babe and feel the pride and joy they bring. But greater still is that calm assurance that child can face uncertain days because he lives. Isn't that wonderful? What a promise. We can face uncertain days because he lives. How many knows we all have uncertain days? Honey, if you haven't, pack a lunch, you will. Amen? Because we all have uncertain days. I'm going to tell you about some uncertain days this evening, just a few minutes. But before I tell you the testimony, I'm going to tell you the funniest story I ever heard. We're going to lighten this up just a little bit here. I was doing a missionette retreat in the state of Tennessee. And the missionette director said to me, let me tell you what happened the other day to my friend at the mall. Said my friend and another lady went to the mall shopping in Nashville, Tennessee. And said about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the other lady said to my friend, I need to go start the evening meal, so I'm going to go home. Said the other lady stayed, and she thought to herself, I'm getting a little weak, so I'm going to go in here and get a Kit Kat candy bar and a Coke to give me some energy. Said she went and bought her a Kit Kat candy bar and bought her a Coke, went out into the mall to sit on a bench there in the mall to drink her Coke and eat her candy bar. Said there was a gentleman sitting on the other end of the bench, and he didn't say anything to her. She didn't say anything to him. She said, I broke off a section of that candy bar, and when I did, he did. He didn't say, I'm hungry, my name's John Doe, may I, do you care, or anything. She said, that ran all over me, but she said, I didn't say anything. Broke off another section of that candy bar, and when I did, he did. She said, when we finished the candy bar, and I finished the Coke, went into the store to finish my shopping, she said, when I came out, there was that same gentleman with a donut on a napkin standing there just leaning against the pole there in the mall. She said, that ran all over me. He'd eat my candy bar and then buy a donut. She said, I leaned over, took a bite out of his donut. Said he didn't say anything. He just kind of looked at the donut, looked perplexed, and looked at me. She said, I went on to get in my car, got in my purse to get out my keys, and there was my candy bar. He already had his laying on the bench. She said, there I'd eaten that man's candy bar, taken a bite out of his donut, and said, I know when he got home that day, he said to his wife, I met the hungriest woman at the mall today. I tried to buy a candy bar, and she ate it. Tried to buy a donut, she took a bite out of it. She said, I prayed he wouldn't show up in my church on Sunday morning and say, there's the hungry woman I met at the mall the other day. That is a true story. It didn't happen to me. It could have, but it didn't. May the 14th, 1988, our youth group was going to take a trip they'd taken annually for 9 previous years. They were going to a place in Ohio called Kings Island. It's an amusement park. My husband had always gone on this trip with them. Now, my husband was a rides person. They did not get too high, too fast, or too wild for him. Now, he may come off of there looking like death chewing on crackers, but he'll get on them. This particular day, my father was celebrating his 79th birthday. So I have 2 brothers. They were coming to our home to celebrate Dad's birthday with us. And my husband said, I'm not going to go on the trip today. I want to stay home and celebrate Dad's birthday. Our son was 15 years old at the time, so he was going to go on the trip with the youth group. We awakened our son very early on Saturday morning, had prayer with him, had breakfast. My husband left, taking him to the church to meet the bus. And he said to me, honey, if there's not enough chaperones going, I will stay and go with them. But if there is, he said, I'll return, he said, in about an hour, in which he did. And I said, honey, how many people did you have on the bus? He said, I had 67 people. It was a 66-passenger bus, and the driver made 67. Said I had prayer with them before they left, before they pulled out. Said there was a young person in every window waving, goodbye, Pastor. We'll see you this evening. My husband told me many times those precious faces would pass before his eyes. They did not make it back. We had a wonderful time with our family. 9 o'clock after they had left, my husband went to the church for prayer time. The men always had prayer time at 9 o'clock on Saturday evening preparing for Sunday services. He said, now I'll not return until the bus comes in. I can pick up Alan, bring him home. Won't have to make but one trip. About 10:30, I walked into our son's room, turned on his light, let down his bed, put his Pepsi beside of his bed. Now he has to get his own candy bar. I don't want to spoil him. Amen. As I walked through the door of our son's room, something spoke to my spirit these words. You better hope that boy returns to this room this evening. And I thought, oh God, what a horrible thought. I stood in the doorway of our son's room thinking he was the only one involved, and I plead the blood of Jesus upon his soul, upon his body and his mind. At 11 o'clock, I still felt so uneasy in my spirit. I called my husband at the church, and I said, honey, has the bus gotten in yet? He said, no. They were supposed to be in early because to have plenty of rest, be in church and Sunday school in the morning. But he said, I'm sure they probably stopped at McDonald's, got back to the bus late. I'm sure they'll be arriving here in a few minutes. 12:10, May the 15th, my husband calls me. And he said, honey, I need you here at the church. One of the fathers has just called, and said, Pastor, this is Conrad Garcia. My son has just called me from Carroll County Hospital in Carrollton, Kentucky. Our bus has been involved in a tragedy, and they're taking our children to 6 different hospitals. And he said, I need you to be over here because the parents are going to be coming in to pick up their children. I said, Daddy, how about Alan? Everything we have is on that bus. Church, I was a pastor's wife, but I'm a mother first. My heart beats like a mother's. And he said, honey, I don't know anything. All I know is I need you here at the church. I hung up the phone and I said, God, I need your help. I don't know where my baby is. I don't know if he's dead or alive, laying on the side of the highway injured. I've got to have your help. I quickly made my way to the church. Some of the parents had already arrived before I got there. My husband had shared with them what he knew. I saw them laying across the front on their faces crying, God, spare our children. I want to bring a truth to you here tonight. The people that laid their face on that carpet praying did not care what color the carpet was. How many knows we get bent out of shape, church, over trivial things? We get bent out of shape over things that has nothing to do with our salvation, unless we allow it. They didn't care what color. They had important things on their mind. My husband tried to call the city police, the state police. They didn't know anything as of yet. He called Carroll County Hospital in Carrollton, Kentucky, where the father said the son was going. The lady that answered, my husband identified himself, and she said, Reverend, let you talk to the state police that's standing here. State police came on the line, and he said, Reverend, before I tell you anything, let me tell you, your son is okay. I met your son out on the highway, and I said to whoever's standing around, I do not know who these people are. Your son walked up to me and said, Sir, I can tell you who we are. We're from First Assembly of God Church in Radcliffe, Kentucky. And he said, I said to your son, do you know the name of your pastor? And he said, yes, sir, I do. It's my dad. And I need to get a hold of my dad. And he said, son, you can't get a hold of your dad now. We cannot have hysterical parents on the side of this highway. And he said, your son said to me, sir, if you talk to my father, please let him know that I'm okay. My mother and dad need to be able to help the others that's going to be coming in there. So he said, do you hear me, sir? Your son is okay. I do not have any information for you at this time, but when I get some information, I will call you back, and I'm asking you to please keep all of those parents at the church. How difficult do you think that is? What do you want to do if you think your child is somewhere in trouble? Your first thought is to get to that child as quickly as you can. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. So my husband talked to them, and he said, you cannot leave because we don't know where your child is. So they were all very sweet to stay there until we could hear some more. He called my husband back in about an hour, and he said, Reverend, I have some information for you. How many people did you have on the bus? And my husband said, I had 67 people. And he said, sir, here's what we've got it narrowed down to. You have 17 fatalities. He said, here's what happened. A drunken driver going the wrong way on the interstate hit our church bus, right headlight to right headlight, breaking the spring system, driving the frame 8 feet back under the bus. And the spring system that had been broken flew into the gas tank, punctured the gas tank. They had fueled up about 30 minutes before the tragedy, and as that spring began to drag on the pavement, creating sparks, and the gasoline began to drip from the punctured gas tank, our bus became a burning inferno. And my husband said to him, how about my associate pastor? Would he have been driving the bus? Yes, sir, he's a fatality. How about my youth pastor? Would he have been standing in the stairwell? Yes, sir, he's a fatality. How about my youth choir director, a lady? He said, sir, she's a fatality. Said, it looks like now we have 14 young people and 3 adults. We wished it had stopped there. But when they began to take them off the bus, they found out they had 10 others that they didn't realize. So we ended up with 24 young people and 3 adults in fatalities. My husband dropped the phone, Pastor, and began to weep, saying these words, boys, I wished I'd never let you go. I'm so sorry. I picked up the phone, said to the state police, sir, can you hold on until my husband can regain his composure? And he said, yes, ma'am, I can. When my husband was able to talk again, the state police said, we know that you have some that are injured. They're out on the side of the highway, waiting for the helicopters to medevac them. Besides the 27 we lost, 13 were burned, many beyond recognition, and lived. Our son had gotten on the bus to sit behind the driver. Before they pulled out of the parking lot, he looked 8 seats back. There was a young lady that had just started attending a youth group, was sitting alone. And he thought to himself, this is not a witness for Christians. Somebody needs to make her feel a part of this group. How many knows people need to be made feel a part of? He got up from where he was seated, walked 8 seats back to sit by that young lady to make her feel a part of the group. The young man that took our son's place behind the driver did not make it off. Our son said most of them had gone to sleep after they'd fueled up. He said, I was asleep. And he said, I heard a scream. He said, I jumped up, looked toward the front of the bus, and the youth pastor was standing in the stairwell, and the flames had already encircled him. And he said to the young people, the youth pastor did, young people, get off. I'm not going to make it. And he lifted his hands and said, I'm going home. How many knows you have to be saved to die that way? All that was left, the state medical examiner told my husband, of our youth pastor was from the head up. He had tried to get the pin out of the fire extinguisher, but he did not have time. Our son said that the associate pastor had stepped out of his seat, was headed down the back trying to get them off. And our son said he stepped out into the aisle. He awakened the young lady seated next to him to bring her with him. And when he stepped out into the aisle, a group of young people just pushed him off the back of the bus. And he said as they laid him along the highways, the injured, waiting for the helicopters to medevac them, one young lady called to him and said, Alan, come over here and tell me if I've got any skin left on my face. He said, I leaned down and said, it's so dark, I cannot see. But he said, I'll pray for you. He said, Mom, I laid my hand upon her arm, and when I lifted my hand, her flesh to the bone came off in the palm of his hand. She was burned so badly. He said to me one day, there's a sight and a sound that will go to my grave with me. He said, it's the sound of 27 lifelong friends crying from within a bus for somebody to help them. And he said, Mom, after a while, it becomes silent within the bus. And he said, then you realize they're gone. And he said, I can still close my eyes and hear the sound. And he said, that's the worst silence you'll ever experience in all your life. Siblings on that bus, naturally. He said, a sibling would get off and try to find their other one. And he said, Mom, when they could not find their sibling, he said, you could hear them scream for a mile. 2 brothers on the bus, Josh and Aaron. Josh is 15, Aaron is 13. Aaron could have been the second one off. He was right there at the door. Could have been the second one off. But he said, I've got a brother on here, and I can't get off without my brother. So he went under the seats, over the seats, found his brother. His brother was already on fire in the aisle. So he reached out with the right hand, pulled him along the aisle, and the flames leaped up this hand, arm, and shoulder and burned off this ear. He dropped him with the right hand, pulled him with the left hand. The flames leaped up this arm and shoulder, burned off this ear and this side of his face and his nose. And he said to his mom and dad, I had Josh at the door. And Josh said to me, Aaron, I'm not going to make it. Please don't let Daddy and Mama lose both of us. And he said, with that, Josh took his last breath. And his parents said to him, Aaron, why did you stay on so long? I want you to hear what he said. He said, I had a cause. Church, do we have a cause? What is our cause? He said, if I didn't do something, my brother was going to burn up. We need a fresh cause among us. There's people that's dying and going to hell if we don't do something. He said, I could not look myself in a mirror and see a perfect face and not realize I didn't do everything I could to help my brother. He said, now I look in the mirror, I see a face I don't recognize, but I say I received these scars trying to help my brother. The worst thing, I think, in my situation with this, Pastor, we had to call 24 sets of parents into the church office every 15 minutes to tell them about their child. Every time you do that, it feels like somebody reaches in and rips your heart out. One set of parents had just driven a new automobile up in the church parking lot for their son's graduation. He was going to graduate on the following Friday. They'd put a sign on the windshield that says, congratulations, son, we love you. Now you've got to tell those parents he won't be back to see that car. The only thing we can stand on, the word says, as thy day, so shall thy strength be. How many knows there's more? We need more strength for some days than we do others. That's what we stood on. The father said to the mother, what are we going to do with the car? She said, I don't know. All I want you to do is get it out of my sight. I don't want to see it again. One set of parents made such an impression on me. Bill and Maddie Nichols. Bill and Maddie had one son, Billy. He was 17 years old. He was a junior at the Fort Knox High School. We had to call them in and say, Maddie, Bill, our bus has been involved in a tragedy. And Billy went home to be with the Lord. The father went all to pieces. And the mother laid her hand over on her husband's shoulder and said these words, just a moment. We've got to stop and give God praise for 17 wonderful years. Folks, I'm not for sure I'm there yet. She lifted her hands and said, God, thank you for 17 wonderful years. You could have taken him earlier, but you let us have him 17 years. She got up from where she was seated, walked around the desk where I was seated with my husband, hugged my neck and said these words, Sister Tennison, I rejoice with you that your son made it, but God's grace will be sufficient for us. Folks, you hear me tonight. It takes more than a bedtime prayer or grace around the table to react like that in that kind of situation. It takes God. Dr. Richard Dobbins, some of you may have heard of him from Emerge Ministries, wonderful Christian psychiatrist or psychologist, wonderful man. The state of Kentucky said to my husband, Reverend, we will pay for anybody you want, any amount, to come and counsel your families. We'll pay. You just tell them to bring whoever, tell them, give us the bill, and we'll pay for it. So, of course, my husband chose Dr. Dobbins and his staff. Dr. Dobbins talked to my husband and I after he had talked with every family. He spent a week with us. And he made this statement, the two that's going to make it out of this tragedy without a scar. Number one, you've guessed it, Maddie Nichols. He said, Maddie Nichols will make it without a scar. And the other one was Dottie Pierman, the one I told you about last evening that married Lee Williams. He said those two will make it out without a scar. Folks, I want to tell you something. It takes the strength and the grace and the power of God to react that way during that time. But she made it through the whole thing and never one time was bitter or even acted hurt or angry. Only the grace of God can do that. We started having the funerals on Thursday. My husband preached Josh's funeral on Thursday, the young man that his brother tried to save him. At 3 hours before the funeral, the doctor came to these parents and said, we need to do surgery on Aaron to save his life. At 2 o'clock this afternoon. And the mother began to weep, and she said, that's the funeral of my oldest son. But my younger sons want me to stay here with him for surgery. What must I do? And I said to her, I said, honey, Josh won't know the difference, but it may be the means of Aaron living or dying if you're there with him. So the father, of course, went to the funeral of Josh. We had that funeral on Thursday. My husband preached 13 funerals on Friday, and he preached 2 funerals on Saturday. We started burying them at 9 o'clock Saturday morning and put the last one in the ground at 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon. That's an emotional roller coaster. But for the grace of God. Now, you may say, what happened to the man that hit the bus? Well, he got 16 years and served 9. But we had to forgive him. I want you to get this in your spirit tonight. Those that hurt you cannot heal you. If you're looking for the individual that hurt you to heal you, you will not be healed. Jesus is the healer. So those that hurt you cannot heal you. You've got to let Jesus do the healing. So my husband preached forgiveness to the church. If Jesus is going to heal us, we're going to have to forgive the man that hurt us. Remember when Peter cut off the ear of the servant of the high priest? Jesus didn't tell Peter to heal him. Peter hurt him. We know enough about Peter. He had to put it on upside down to let the man know he was at the wrong place at the right time. Amen? But Jesus said, hand me the ear, and Jesus can heal without a scar. So my husband had to preach. We've got to forgive the man that caused the problem. But I want you to hear me tonight, church. Forgiveness doesn't release the individual, release him from responsibility. Forgiveness releases us. But he's still responsible for what he's done. He's accountable for what he's done. That doesn't release him from accountability. What it does, it releases us from unforgiveness. So he had to preach, you've got to forgive the man that hit the bus because God has to forgive you. Lee Williams, the gentleman that lost his entire family, I told you about last evening, was in Clarksville, Tennessee with some friends. And he said, I looked around and he said, I saw my friends had lost their son, but they had each other. And he said, my friend had his mom and dad, and said, I began to have a pity party and say, I don't have anybody. He said, I excused myself, went into the room, shut the door, and said, God, just let me see my family for 1 minute. Ring that phone, let them talk to me. Turn the radio on, let them talk to me. And he said the phone didn't ring, the radio didn't come on, but he said he heard a still, small voice. How many knows that voice is still speaking? He said, I heard a still, small voice, and the voice said, Lee, if I allowed you to see your family for 1 minute, they wouldn't tell you they love you and miss you. You know that. They would tell you, get your life back together. Come to this place where we are. It's beautiful. And he said, God went on to say, they would tell you, forgive the man that caused the hurt so you can spend eternity with us. Lee said that night in that room, God released him. And he forgave the man that caused the hurt. And he released him and gave him peace in his heart and in his mind. Folks, whatever we go through, God is still greater. The strength and the grace of God is still greater. Now, me telling this testimony, and I want you to understand this tonight, do not allow any kind of fear to get in your heart. It will probably never happen again that way. So don't be afraid to let a child get on a bus or let a child go somewhere. Don't allow fear to get a hold of your heart, okay? He's not giving us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. God still is a protector. So we've got to say, God, I'm trusting you. I'm believing you. But during that time, I asked a question, Jesus, where were you? And I explained to you the other night. You may say we don't question God. Church, we don't question God's authority. But we all have questions. We just don't question the authority of God. Job said, if I knew where I'd find God, I'd come and complain. Some of us are not looking for him and complaining. No. That's what Job said. So I said, Jesus, where were you? And he said, I was at the same place I was when my disciples were going through their storm. If you want to turn with me to Mark chapter 7, we'll read there, beginning with the 45th verse. And straightway he constrained his disciples to get into the ship to go to the other side before into Bethsaida while he sent away the people. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. And when even was come, the ship was in the midst of the sea, and he alone on the land. And he saw them toiling and rowing, for the wind was contrary unto them. About the fourth watch of the night he cometh unto them walking upon the sea, would have passed by them. But when they saw him walking upon the sea, they supposed it had been a spirit, and cried out. For they all saw him and were troubled. And immediately he talked with them, saith unto them, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And he went up unto them into the ship, and the wind ceased, and they were so amazed in themselves beyond measure, and wondered. Number one, he said, I was praying for you. How many knows the word says he was praying for them? The word says he's ever interceding at the right hand of the Father in our behalf. He said, Simon, Simon, Satan has desired that he might have you, that he might sift thee as wheat, but I have prayed for thee, that your faith fail not. Amen? Jesus is praying for you tonight. He's ever interceding. He's on first name basis with the Father, and there's nobody better in the world to pray for you than Jesus. So he said, I was praying for you. Number two, he said, not only was I praying for you, but I was watching you. The word said he saw them in their despair. He saw them toiling and rowing. His eyes are ever upon you. Job made this statement, I can't find God. I go forward, he's not there. Backward, he's not there. On the right hand, on the left hand, he's nowhere to be found. But he stops and says these words, But he knoweth the way that I take. And when he's tried me, I shall come forth as pure gold. What am I saying? Folks, you may not be able to see him, feel him, or touch him, but what's important, he knows where you are. His eyes are ever upon you. He knows where you are. So he was watching them. Number three, not only was he praying for them, not only was he watching them, but folks, he came walking upon the circumstance that was about to defeat him. What was about to defeat him? The winds and the waves. What did he come walking upon? The winds and the waves. He addressed their fear. He addressed their faith. But he came walking upon the circumstance that was about to defeat him. Tuesday morning, after the tragedy on Saturday, I awakened. Overwhelmed. How do you comfort all these people? Then your son made it off. What do you say? My husband had gone to Louisville, Kentucky to visit the young people in the burn units. We had 13 young people in 6 different hospitals. So he had gone to Louisville, Kentucky to visit them. I said, God, if I don't hear from you today, I'm not going to make it. I went over to the church, and the telephone company had installed 8 new lines in the church. We received over 1,000 calls a day. Isn't it wonderful to be a part of a family of God? You don't know me. Here's where we're from. But we want you to know we've been praying for you today. So the board members said to the ladies, you handle these phones. Make a schedule. Handle these phones 8 hours a day. Pastor and Sister Tennison cannot possibly talk to everybody that calls in. Make a note of everybody that calls. At the end of the day, hand them the notes. If it's important, they said go after one of them. 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, one of the girls came to me and said, Sister Tennison, President Reagan's on the phone. He wants to talk to Pastor Tennison. He's not here. Could you talk to him? I said, I guess I could. Went to the phone. President Reagan said, Miss Tennison, this is President Ronald Reagan. Nancy and I are praying for you today. Miss Tennison, if you need military or if you need money, please let me know. He said, I'm going to give you this phone number. It rings in the Oval Office. I'm the only one that answers this number. Don't give it to anyone. I still have that number. How much is it worth to you? If Ronald Reagan answers, you better check where you are. We talked a few minutes. I thanked him. He hung up. 2 hours later, one of the girls came to me and said, Sister Tennison, Vice President George H.W. Bush is on the phone. Wants to talk to Pastor Tennison. He's not here. Would you talk to him? I said, I guess I could. So went to the phone. Vice President Bush said, Miss Tennison, this is Vice President George Bush. Barbara and I are praying for you today. We're parents and grandparents. Our hearts bleed with yours today. Vice President Bush broke down and began to sob. Now, I don't know your political flavor. That's your business. But I appreciate anybody in that position that can still feel my pain. He wept and he wept and he wept. Totally lost his composure. When he was able to regain his composure, he apologized. And I said, Mr. Vice President, there's not any words you could have said that would have done me any better than what you just did. You felt my pain. We talked a few minutes. I thanked him. He hung up. 3 o'clock that afternoon, one of the girls came to me and said, Sister Tennison, Sister Alice Jane Schaefer Blythe is on the phone, wants to talk to you. Now let me tell you who she is. She's my mentor. She lived to be 101. At 100, she walked around a mile every day. I'm a walker. I walk around 4 blocks every day, push them back on the bed and lay back down. A real walker. She was the women's director for the state of Tennessee for 35 years. At the time of her death, she had been preaching 86 years. Isn't that wonderful? Boy, I love this woman. She was a woman of God. I'm going to tell you, she was. Love this woman. Said, Sister Blythe wants to talk to you. So I ran to the phone. Sister Blythe said these words. Honey, I've been before the throne today. Hear me, church. And the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords says, you're going to make it. Now, I want to tell you something. I appreciated President Reagan, but he had limited power. He couldn't promise me I was going to make it. I appreciated Vice President Bush, but he had limited power. He couldn't promise me I was going to make it. But when she said, I've been before the one that has all power, and he says, you're going to make it. How many knows that's the most important call I talked on that day? You can't get any better, church, than from the top. Amen. I like that, brother, whoever did that. That's the way I feel. He said, you're going to make it. Folks, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords met me, came walking upon the circumstance that was about to defeat me. And she said to me, I'm on my way. I'll be there in about 2 hours. She came and never left my side until we buried the last one on Saturday. I needed that strength. But when she said the King of Kings says you're going to make it, he came walking upon the circumstance that was about to defeat me. Number 4, where was he? Praying for me, watching me, came walking upon the circumstance that was about to defeat me, and he met me at my point of need. Where'd he get? He got in the boat. Where'd they need him? In the boat. When you can't get to where Jesus is, he'll come to where you are. He'll meet you at your point of need. Christy Pierman, the associate pastor driving the bus, his daughter, 14 years old, burned over 65% of her body and lived. Spent many months in the hospital. Her mother brought her home one day. She'd been home about a week, and her mother called me and said, Christy cannot breathe. I've got to take her back to the hospital. Will you go with me? I said, yes, ma'am, I will. I'm ready. We took her back to the University Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. Ear, nose, and throat specialist was waiting on us when we arrived. He examined Christy, came out, and he said, Miss Pierman, I put a trach in. Her air passage is the size of a pencil lead and should be the size of her thumb. Her vocal cords are melted together. Your daughter is not going to be able to talk for 6 or 7 years, and that's with much speech therapy. She sucked that heat down her throat, they said, hollering for her father to get off, and it melted her vocal cords together. So when that doctor left, Dottie looked at me and said, Sister Tennison, I cannot handle any more. How can I tell a 14-year-old girl that watched her dad die that she's not going to be able to talk for 6 or 7 years, and that's with much speech therapy? And I said, Dottie, that's what the doctor said. Jesus didn't say that. Jesus didn't say that. Jesus has the final word. He said, bring her back in 3 weeks. We took her back in 3 weeks. He had split the vocal cords to put stents in to let them rest. He removed the the stents, and he said, I'm going to give your daughter a mechanical device to lay on her tongue so she'll be able to communicate. She's not going to be able to talk for 6 or 7 years. So she brought her home, we did on a Friday afternoon. Saturday, Dottie said, about 10 o'clock that night, somebody called and said, Dottie, we've got a family member that's having problems and wants you to go to prayer. And Dottie said, I thought, go to prayer. I've got all I can handle here. And the Lord said to her, if you will pray out of your need, I will meet you in your need. How many's ever had to pray out of your need? She said, as I was praying, I heard a noise. And she said, I went into where Christy was and said, Christy, what was that noise? And Christy put her finger over the trach and said, hi, Mom, I can talk. What the doctor said was going to be 6 or 7 years was only 6 or 7 hours. Amen? Hallelujah. He met her at her point of need. She called the house, our house, and when I answered the phone, she said, Sister Tennison, this is Christy, and I can talk. Let me tell you something, church. I had a Pentecostal spell all over that house. How many knows what a Pentecostal spell is? How long has it been since you had one? Amen? I had a Pentecostal spell all over that house. God had heard and met her at her point of need. Sunday morning, she got up and gave her testimony to the church. There was a reporter from the local newspaper there. And let me tell you something. The headlines of the newspaper on Monday morning read like this: "Hello, Papa, I can talk." And at the end of the article, the reporter said these words: "These people still believe in a God that can heal." How many still believe in a God that can heal? Hallelujah, God. They still believe in a God that can heal. What did he do? He met her at her point of need. Folks, where was he? Praying for me, watching me, came walking upon the circumstance that was about to defeat me, and he met me at my point of need. Let me go on. 2 other things I learned. Give me a little bit more time, if you don't mind. How many going to give me about 5 more minutes? 10 more minutes. 5, 10, 15, 20, 20. Doing well. I learned that we have no promise of tomorrow. Today is the day of salvation. Our youth Sunday school teacher came out of her class the Sunday morning before the tragedy the following Saturday, was crying. And I said, "Wanda, what's wrong?" She said, "I was teaching on the rapture of the church this morning, and one of the young men said to me, 'I don't believe it's going to happen. I don't believe Jesus is coming. I've heard it all my life.' I said, 'What'd you say to him?' She said, 'I said to him he could come for you before next Sunday.'" Wednesday evening, we closed a youth revival. All of our youth was in the altar, rededicated their lives to the Lord. And do you know that was that young man's last Sunday school class? He didn't make it off of that church bus. Our son said about 20 minutes before the tragedy, 30 minutes, a young gal came up to him in the aisle and said, "Alan, I want you to pray with me. If I don't pass science this year, I'm not going to pass my test." And he said, I prayed with her, and then I said to her, "Do you know without a doubt, should something happen to us before we get home, do you know you're ready to meet Jesus?" She cried and said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Mom, I took her by the hands, and as she wept, I led her to Jesus." She didn't make it off. And Alan said, when I realized she didn't make it off, I said, "God, the only prayer that really mattered was the last prayer that we prayed." The grace and the mercy and the love of God is so. She probably served him all of 30 minutes. But how many know she'll spend eternity in heaven with the rest of us? I wouldn't wait that long, but she will spend eternity with the rest of us. The third thing I learned, and it's going to get quiet in here because people don't talk a lot during surgery, how to treat my family, my blood family, and my church family. We talk more hateful to the people we love the most. Let me give you an example. Pastor accidentally bumps into me and says, "Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry." And I go smile and say, "That's no problem. Thank you, Pastor." My wonderful late husband bumps into me, says, "Oh, honey, I'm sorry." And I'll say to him, "What's wrong with you? You totally blind anymore? Can't you see where you're going?" Now, I love Pastor Robert, but I don't love him like I do Don Tennison, and Sister April's happy about that. Of course, I wouldn't rob the cradle anyway. No, I'm sorry. No disrespect. Why can't I give the man I love the most the kind words I give everybody else? Folks, we talk so hateful to the people we love the most. I want to stop here and tell you something tonight. Right now, I'm talking to husbands and wives. And you listen to this little old lady. Enjoy every moment you have with each other. Mine went on to be with the Lord, as you know, in April. And let me tell you, many of you already know that in here. It's never the same. Be kind to one another. You don't have to be sharp, but talk kindly to each other. In the foyer of our home, I kept it waxed on my hands and knees. I can't see from the end of a mop. So one day, my husband brought our son home from school. Our son wears a size 12 shoe. He stepped that big old foot in on my waxed floor, and I said, hold it just a minute. Who do you think does all this work around here? Nobody appreciates anything I do. How many's ever heard that song? That song has several verses to it, and I don't have time to sing them all. And my husband, the kind gentleman that he is, very, very kind, he said, Mama, what's wrong? And I said, just wax this floor. Y'all come walking in on my wax floor, messing it up. Who do you think does all this work around here? And my husband said, Mother, we're so sorry. Don't that make you sick? After you've let somebody have it? Son, would you like to go get some ice cream while Mother's floor dries? He said, yes, sir. He'd have been glad to go anywhere to get out of there. When they left, the Lord said to me, had that been one of your church members, follow me. They stepped their foot in on your wax floor. They'd have said, oh, we're sorry, you're waxing the floor. And I'd have said, that's okay. Come on in, I can do it again. You all know I'm telling the truth. Pastor, did you turn that heat up? I see some red faces out there. You all know I'm telling the truth. When they got back in, I apologized to both of them. And I said, Daddy, I'm sorry. After all, you're making the payments on this home. You can come anytime you want to. Son, as long as we own this home, you're welcome here. Please forgive me. 2 months after the tragedy, walked into my living room one morning. There's a pile of hay on the floor. I don't like hay on the floor. Our son worked in the hay fields in the summertime making money for missions trips, AIM trips. I remember the day that his daddy came home and said, son, found you a job today. And he said, Dad, he didn't know I was looking for one. But he said, in the morning at 8 o'clock, you'll be in the hayfield. And he'd come in and said, clean out his shoe. He'd gone to school, and there was that pile of hay, and I started to get upset. And the Lord said to me, 2 more minutes, and there'd never be another pile of hay. He got off 2 minutes before the bus exploded. And he said, many a mother would trade your hay this morning to have a child to love and hold on to. Listen to me, parents, especially you that are still raising children. Be kind to those children. They have to be disciplined, but there's a way to do it. Love them, because let me tell you something. Tomorrow, they're going to be gone. How many knows that? It comes so quickly. Love them. Be kind to them. You that have grown children, hug them. Love them. Tell them you love them. They need that. You may be 90 and they may be 70, but they still need it. A mother in our church had a 13-year-old boy. Said she came home from work and he was so excited about going to on the trip. And she said something that happened at work that I was upset about. Let me stop here and say something. Don't bring your problems from work home. Your family can't help what happened at work. So don't bring them home to that family. And she said, I was upset. And I said to him, you're not going to go on the trip unless you clean your room. Not anything wrong with cleaning your room. But she said, Sister Tennison, for 30 minutes, I told him all of his faults. He wept and he cried. He was so hurt. But he cleaned his room, cried himself to sleep that night. And she said, I did not get up and see him the next morning when his dad took him to meet the bus. I didn't see him. She said, when I found out he didn't make it off of a burning church bus, I walk into a room that'll be clean the rest of my life. On the mirror was taped a note. And here's what the note said. Dear Mother, I cleaned this room for one reason. Not because I wanted to go on the trip, but because I love you. And if I never return to this room, Mom, remember, I love you. Love your son. And she said to me, all I have is a yellow note of the last memory, how I acted. Let me say something to you tonight, church. If the fruit of the Spirit doesn't work at home, it doesn't work. The fruit of the Spirit is not something I display in public. The fruit of the Spirit is something that works within me 24/7. In everybody's life, there's a private person and there's a public person, and they should be the same person. How many believes I'm preaching the truth tonight? Fathers, I want to talk to you a few minutes, so just talk to mothers. Many of you let mama raise the children. If you know when their birthday is, you say, here's money, go get them something. Why don't you go get them something? You're their daddy. How many knows every child needs to be hugged and loved by a daddy? It's harder for a daddy to do that than a mother. A mother normally can do that. And you may say, well, we're just not that kind of family. I am so sorry get to be that kind of family. I wasn't raised that way, you may say. Well, I'm so sorry you wasn't, but God has the power to change you. You don't have to live like that. So we need to allow ourselves to love our children, be interested in our children, know about that child, know their favorite food, know who their teacher is. Daddy, you learn about them. My husband was a twin. I was almost a twin, just missed it by one. He has a twin brother, and together they were 6 feet tall. My husband's father made it plain to him, I do not love you. I will never love you. I love your brother, but I don't love you. My husband endured physical abuse. He would break hoe handles over his head. He would split his arm open with angle iron. Father never told him that he loved him. But you know what my husband said? God, I will love my daddy. I will forgive my daddy. And I will not act like my daddy because you have the power to change me. Listen to me tonight, church. You may have been raised in an alcoholic situation. You may have been raised in an abusive situation. But let me tell you something. You don't have to act that way because God has the power to change you. And you can't say, I act like I do because of my mother, my father, or whoever. No, you act like you do because you want to act like that. God has the power to change you. And do you know, I was married to the sweetest man to me in all the world. He could have been bitter, he could have been angry, but he allowed God to work in him. I told you the other night, he would discipline our son like this. Come over here, baby, honey. I really need to whip you. That's as excited as he ever got. But he allowed God to do a work in his life. So even though you were not raised in a loving situation, you don't have to follow that pattern. God wants to change your life and make you a loving, warm person to your family, to your children. Hug them, love them, tell them you love them. One of the saddest scenes we ever witnessed was a man leaning over the casket of a 17-year-old boy, and he kept going like this, I am so sorry, son, I didn't even know you. I didn't even know you, and now you're gone. Folks, know those children. Know about those children. Be with those children. Love those children. They're a gift from Almighty God. And it could be different tomorrow. Get this in your spirit. Lee Williams, the man that lost his entire family on that burning church bus, he said on a Tuesday before the tragedy on Saturday, his wife said to him, Lee, Robin, the 10-year-old, was playing softball. And he said, my 10-year-old was the worst softball player you ever met. Said she couldn't even hit a basketball when I threw it to her with a bat. And said, my wife says to me, she's found a glove and a bat that she wants at the department store. He said, how much are they? He said, about $60 together. He said, I'm not going to pay that for a child that can't play softball. And said, his wife said, okay. He said he went to work, and all morning long he heard these words, your little girl really wants that bat and glove. So he said, I said to my secretary, I'm going to take off 2 hours for lunch. Don't make any appointments for me. Went by savings, took out $100. Went by the school, picked up his little 10-year-old. And she said, Daddy, what are we going to do? He said, it's going to be our day. He said, I took her to the department store, bought her a glove, a bat, and a softball. And I said to her, when you get back to school, lunch will be over. So let's go to McDonald's for lunch. And he said, Sister Tennison, my little 10-year-old talked 45 minutes nonstop to me. Didn't take a breath. Took her back to school, and he said before she got out, she scooted over and kissed me and said, you've got to be the best daddy in all the world. He said, I promise you, I was crying so hard I could hardly see how to get back to the post. Sunday afternoon, after he found out that he had lost his entire family, we hadn't lost them, they'd gone on to be with the Lord. He said, Sister Tennison, I cannot go back to the house alone. Will you go back with me? I said, I will. We walked into his house, walked down the hallway. The first bedroom we came to was his 10-year-old. On the bedpost hung a glove. In that glove was a softball. And across the bed laid a bat. And he looked at me and said these words, you can't buy that from me for $1 million. The last memory of my little girl. Listen to me tonight, church. I'd rather have a ball, glove, and bat than I would a yellow note. How many is hearing me tonight? He said that was my last memory of my little girl. I'm going to finish up. Young people, I want to talk to you a minute. 15-year-old sister said to her 13-year-old sister, don't ride with me today, don't run around with me today, and don't ride back with me today. In fact, if I never see you again, it'll be too soon. The 15-year-old made it off. The 13-year-old didn't. And my husband and I have counseled a 15-year-old by the hour. And she said, every time I close my eyes, I see the hurt look on my little sister's face. And there's no way to change it. How many know we can be sarcastic sometime with each other? We can be hateful sometime with each other, or even with our parents. But before you start to do that, ask yourself this question. Would I want this to be the last words that they heard me say? Folks, we all need to do that. Before we start, we need to say, do I want this to be the last words that he'd hear me say? What did I learn? I learned where Jesus was. I learned we have no promise of tomorrow. And I learned how to treat my family. Through a tragedy, changed my life. Changed my life. Let me tell you this. Last words. I told you my husband passed away in April. He talked to me all day on a Thursday. Very, very, very coherent. Told me what to do about different things. I knew he knew God had told him it was his time. Let me go back. He had surgery in January of last year. He had surgery with something taken off the ear and the arm. And he was looking towards the ceiling one day. And he said, I said, Daddy, what are you looking at? He said, I've just seen the gates, and I've seen beyond the gates. It's beautiful. But he said, they told me I couldn't come in now, but they were coming back after me, and they were going to take me in a little later. That was 4 months from the time he saw that. So on a Friday, we had to take him to the hospital 4 months later. I was sitting there holding his hand on Wednesday. And I said, God, if I could just hear his voice one more time. He hadn't opened his eyes. He hadn't responded to anything. If I could just hear his voice one more time, it would give me such peace and comfort. And in about 5 minutes, he opened his eyes, he looked at me, and he said these words, you know, I love you. Closed his eyes and went on to be with the Lord the next morning. Folks, I hold on to those last words. How many knows what I'm talking about? I hold on to those last words. You know, I love you. Think about how you talk to people and think in your mind, do I want that to be my last words? Father, search our hearts tonight. Search our hearts. Let the fruit of the Spirit reign in our home. Heads are bowed and eyes are closed for just a moment, please. I'm going to ask a question tonight. If, God forbid, something happened to you, did those young people, I want you to lift your hand and say, I do not know I'd be ready to meet God. I don't know that I would be ready. Can I see your hand? Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? I want to make sure. I want to know tonight before I leave this place that I'm ready to meet God. I want to know, without a doubt, I'm ready. Those that lifted your hand, I'm going to ask you to go a step further. Would you stand, please, if you lifted your hand? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to ask you if you step forward and come meet me here at this altar. Come on up here if you don't mind.